Welcome to the fireside and my in-depth analysis of the Love, Death, and Robots short, Fish Nights. But first, I just wanted to let everyone know that my in-depth analysis of Good Hunting is up exclusively on my Odysee channel if you want to go check that out. Just a fair warning, it does deal with some pretty mature subject matter and there's a reason it's an Odysee exclusive video. But before I stall anymore, let's get on with the analysis. Fish Night centers around two door-to-door salesmen, an old man and a young man, when their car breaks down in the middle of the Arizona desert and they're visited by the beautifully animated ghosts of the prehistoric sea life that once inhabited the region. Now, despite these gorgeous visuals, this short appears to be universally hated within the Love, Death, and Robots fandom, with people calling it all flash and no substance, but I feel like this short's a lot smarter than it's given credit for. And while I wouldn't call this one the most underrated short of Volume 1, it's definitely the most misunderstood because, well, to quote the mysterious Mr. Enter, it's like real deep, man. But let me explain. Fish Nights appears to be an allegory for how when we're young, we think we're bulletproof and take things, more specifically our own lives, for granted. But as we get older, we start to become a lot more accepting that things don't last forever. Again, more specifically, human life. And this is best represented in our two characters' interactions leading up to the titular Fish Night. You see, when their car breaks down, the old man remains relatively calm and accepts their situation pretty quickly. He even jokes about their situation, stating that the car is, and I quote, dead as their sails this week. While the younger man insists they can fix the car by pouring their drinking water into the radiator, to which the older man responds, in his own words,
"It's dead, son. There's no coming back from dead. Not even for a Plymouth."
This may not sound super relevant, but the car being a Plymouth is actually a very important bit of symbolism. For those too young to know, heck, I'm a little too young to know, Plymouth was an auto brand started by Chrysler in 1928 before being discontinued in 2001. And over the course of its 73-year lifespan, it gained a pretty loyal customer base who were understandably sad to see it go in 2001. And the old man's high opinion of Plymouth cars, along with his calmness and ability to joke about his breaking down, suggests that while he was probably sad to see Plymouth go, he has since grown to accept it. Also, the Plymouth could be seen as a metaphor for loss in general. The truth is, when we lose something, whether it's a car or a loved one, it hurts a lot more when we're younger because we haven't yet experienced such loss. But as we get older, the hurt starts to lessen as we develop somewhat of an emotional callus, and we eventually accept that loss is just part of life. So getting back to the plot, the two men decide to camp out for the night, then hoof it back to town just before sunrise when it's cooler, and we get a scene that's also pretty significant to the themes. Notice how the old man has effectively accepted their situation and is hunkered down in the shade, not wasting energy on things he can't change. Meanwhile, the younger man can't sit still as he paces around, continues to try to fix the dead Plymouth, and gets frustrated because he just can't accept their situation. This also appears to be symbolic of the concept of how, when we're younger, we take things for granted and think we can do and change anything. But as we get older, it starts to sink in that there's some things that we just can't change and that things don't last forever, a concept further supported by our two characters' jobs as door-to-door salesmen and their attitudes towards said job. Let me ask you guys a question. When's the last time a door-to-door salesman that wasn't a Boy Scout selling popcorn or a Girl Scout selling cookies came to your door? Chances are it was well over a decade ago. Nowadays, the door-to-door salesman is basically a dead industry, but decades ago, they used to be a huge part of the economy. Because if you lived in an isolated farming community in the early 1900s and needed something like tools or a vacuum cleaner, your options were to either A, mount up the horse buggy and take a multi-day trip to the city and get it, B, order it from the Sears catalog, or C, buy it from a door-to-door salesman. But eventually, as car ownership became more mainstream and major retailers began expanding into rural areas, the door-to-door salesman went from being a necessity to a nuisance, and the internet effectively killed the industry overnight. And because of this, the older man appears to have a very bitter and pessimistic attitude towards his job, stating that the days of the door-to-door salesman are fading fast, while the younger man remains confident, stating that with the right attitude, they can sell anything. These differing attitudes suggest that the older man has basically come to terms with the fact that he's working in a dead industry and that he only continues to work it because he has for so long and is just holding out for his retirement package. Whereas the young man appears to be working this job because he's entrepreneurial and sees an opportunity in it. Plus he was playing with dice, which suggests he's a risk taker, as many people are when they're young. But continuing with the plot, the shadows of the clouds on the ground remind the old man of the ocean, to which the young man responds he's never seen the ocean. This will be important later on. The old man then explains how millions of years ago, the Arizona desert was once a prehistoric ocean, filled with fantastical prehistoric creatures, and he then wonders that if the ghosts of humans can haunt their old homes, could the same be true for animals? The young man then goes to sleep in the car, while the old man reflects how it must have been nice being a sea creature floating around without a care in the world. Although I'm pretty sure the old man already knows how that feels. Rather, he did when he was a younger man. This line is a subtle implication that the older man wishes he could go back to being able to take things like his job and his car for granted, like the younger man can, and just not have a care in the world. So the two men camp out in the car for the night, and it turns out the old man was right. The ghosts of the prehistoric sea creatures are haunting where they once lived, and seriously, how gorgeous is this animation? Well, obviously the younger man agrees with me because he's so amazed with what he's seen that, despite the older man's warnings, he disrobes and then swims up with the fish, where he's then eaten by a megalodon. Alright, let's break this down. We'll start with the younger man. I've heard some interpretations of the short being that he isn't actually there and that he's a manifestation of the older man's younger self. And while I wouldn't go as far as to say the younger man isn't there, he clearly is symbolic of the older man's younger self, and the passion he once had for his job, the love he once had for his car, and his excitement at seeing the ocean for the first time. And the titular Fish Night is a representation of how when the man was younger, the world seemed so beautiful and filled with wonder and coelacanths. But as he got older, he realized that the world isn't all trilobites and nautiloids, and that it is in fact also filled with proverbial megalodons. Lastly, the young man getting eaten appears to be symbolic of the turning point in the old man's life when he first came to terms with the fact that he isn't young anymore. The proverbial death of the man he once was, and the birth of the man he is now. And that is why I think Fish Nights is a lot deeper than people give it credit for. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and boost if you're watching on Odysee. Also, feel free to follow me on Mastodon. You guys fuel my flames.